off the limbs on today's episode of Playing with Fear. Welcome to JoBlo Horror Videos Playing with Fear, where we take a look at some of the landmark horror titles throughout the history of gaming. Today we look at one of the finest entries into the modern horror genre. While not a licensed game, Dead Space takes inspiration from Event Horizon, The Thing, Alien, and other sci-fi horror hallmarks to create a wholly original and terrifying experience.
Get the hell out of there!
Horror in video games, much like horror in film, has been around almost as long as the medium has existed. You get a good mix of licensed properties, as we've looked at for most of the episodes of this series so far, but you also find original concepts that really resonate and become all-time classics. Glenn Schofield spent most of his early career as an artist and art director for a wide variety of games. He worked on Barbie Game Girl for the Game Boy, Swamp Thing for the NES, and Street Fighter, the movie, the game, for Sega Saturn, all through the early and mid-90s. He did more, but I love knowing that the creative mind behind Dead Space cut his teeth on Barbie and Street Fighter the movie. After a couple of canceled games, Schofield got to be game director for the first time on back-to-back Gex games. Remember Gex? Yeah, so do I. Gex Enter the Gecko in 1998, and Gex 3 the following year. After some more time building his skill set with other jobs on other video games, he decided to pitch his passion project to his current employer EA, who had under their wing Redwood Studios. Schofield wanted to create a horror game unlike any other, and loved the existing powerhouses of horror Resident Evil and Silent Hill. Silent Hill had put out 4 entries at this point, and while the stories, characters, and even gameplay changed between them, they all involved Silent Hill and its special brand of deeper psychological terror. Oh boy, are we going to get into those titles one day. Resident Evil had expanded its formula after 3 games, and even kept largely the same characters and setting through the first 3 titles. Then came Resident Evil 4, and suddenly everything changed. Resident Evil 4 is one of those game changers, pun very much intended, that completely turns a genre or style of game on its head. The game itself has one of the longest development cycles ever, but a happy ending as it became one of the greatest games of all time. Hell, it even rivals Skyrim for the number of ports that got released, and is rumored to be getting the patented Resident Evil remake treatment. It also, unfortunately, began the worst cycle of RE games, with the first 3 being the classic cycle, the middle 3 being the action-heavy cycle, and with 2 in the books already, I'll assume the next 3 being the back-to-horror first-person cycle. It nevertheless has been an inspiration for countless games, including today's title, Dead Space. After seeing how revolutionary it was, Schofield decided that Dead Space, originally called Rancid Moon in its concept phase, should be Resident Evil in space, and that's exactly how he wanted his team to look at it during development. Of course it is, on its most base level, a survival horror game, but it did enough differently and ended up being much scarier than any of the Resident Evil titles up to that point. With a flagship horror title ready to be unleashed upon the world, Redwood Studios would branch off to become Visceral Games and release Dead Space on October 13th, 2008 for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, with a PC port a week later on the 20th. The game received mostly positive reviews, and while sales were softer than expected at first, the title would eventually push over that golden million number. Isaac Clarke is an engineer on the USG Kellyan, along with Zach Hammond, Kendra Daniels, and Corporals Johnston and Chen. I'm sure they'll be fine. On a mission to the USG Ishimura after they sent a distress signal while performing a planet crack on Aegis 7. Isaac has special interest in the mission as his girlfriend Nicole was part of the crew on the Ishimura, with the game even opening with a video sent by her to Clarke. But the other characters treat it as just another mission. The Kellyan has trouble docking and is severely damaged, but none of the crew sustain any injury. While the ship seems abandoned, Isaac is told to access the ship's computer to assess the damage. It's here the crew of the Kellyan find that the Ishimura is anything but abandoned. While Isaac is finding out the extent of the damage, the lights and security activate, and unidentified creatures kill Johnson and Chen. Shocking, I know. Clarke makes a run for it while Hammond and Daniels do the same. With nothing to defend himself and more of the creatures literally breaking out of the walls after him, Clarke makes it to an elevator and travels further into the ship. Stumbling into a workshop, Clarke finds the remains of one of the crew along with a mining tool, a plasma cutter to be specific, and a cryptic message written in blood. Cut off their limbs. With the plasma cutter in hand, Clarke begins his quest to find Nicole as well as the rest of the surviving Kellyan shipmates. Making his way through the ship and getting more comfortable killing the creatures, Clarke finds Hammond and Daniels in a tram tunnel. Most of the Ishimura's systems are down and Clarke will need to reboot them if they have any hope of leaving. The first step is activating the previously mentioned trams, followed by getting to the captain's body in the morgue to receive his codes, refueling the ship, activating the centrifuge, reactivating the engines, blowing up asteroids while fixing the automatic defense systems, and a load of other odds and ends. Not bad for a single engineer. While traversing the ship, Isaac discovers audio and video logs that slowly reveal what happened to the Ishimura and her crew. It turns out that the ship's goal was to retrieve something called the Red Marker from Aegis 7, and that the ship's captain, Benjamin Matthias, was one of the most devoted followers to a cult-like religion called the Church of Unitology. Subtle, I know. The planet was quarantined for a classified reason, but was also full of resources that could be used on many other planets throughout the galaxy. The Red Marker was brought on board the ship, and a chain reaction began that would not be stopped. Almost immediately, the crew of the Ishimura started experiencing paranoia and delusions that caused violence to break out all over the ship. Murder and suicide became unstoppable, and while they believed it was caused by the marker, they couldn't explain why or stop it. Then they decided to crack the planet, a process that is exactly what it sounds like. Soon after, creatures began to appear and infect the bodies of the planet, both living and the dead. This new hybrid creature would become known as a necromorph. Captain Matthias became more and more paranoid and unstable, and a coup began with the remaining unitologist medical staff that resulted in the captain dying of a syringe to the eyeball by the head physician Dr. Klein. Side note, this series could have been directed by Lucio Fulci with how much eye trauma you find in these games. While the chaos continued on the ship, a lone craft from the planet inadvertently brought a necromorph onto the Ishimura, where the multitude of dead bodies began to reanimate and take over the ship. Soon after, the communications and most of the escape pods were damaged or jettisoned in an attempt to keep the infection from reaching civilization at large. While continuing on his not small number of tasks to fix the ship, Clark runs into his girlfriend Nicole, and although they're separated by a large gap, she helps motivate him to get everything on the ship right again. Hammond, Daniels, and Clark become paranoid of one another, but are able to send a distress signal out that is picked up by the USM Valor. Unfortunately for the Valor, they pick up one of the escape pods from the Ishimura that was just full of necromorphs. The ship crashes into the larger Ishimura, and the group decides to use the equipment from the Valor to escape. Clark and Hammond are able to get what they need, but Hammond is killed by one of the larger classes of necromorphs. When Clark returns, he is contacted by Klein and told that he must return the marker to the cracked planet and put to sleep the hive mind creature that controls the army of necromorphs. Klein is killed by Daniels, who turns out to be an EarthGov agent sent to retrieve the marker, but Nicole is able to instruct Isaac how to get the marker on a ship and return it to the planet. Doing this stops the swarm, but also begins the destruction of the planet. Daniels is able to trap Isaac and show him the full version of Nicole's video, the one where she takes her own life. The marker had given Isaac delusions to help him complete his goal. Daniels drags the marker away, but is killed by the reawakened hive mind before Isaac is able to destroy it and escape before the planet explodes. Alone on the escape pod, Isaac watches Nicole's video one last time for closure before being overtaken by her ghost. The screen becomes distorted with symbols of the marker and then fades to black.
The doors are locked! Run!
Just as the story and setting take influence from some of the great horror and sci-fi movies of all time, but with a fresh twist, so too does the gameplay feel like survival horror, but with fresh additions here and there. First and foremost, controlling Isaac is fluid and easy, even in the zero-G sections of Dead Space. Gone are the tank controls, replaced by a spread that allows you to move how and when you like and fight while in motion. While the gameplay does boil down to fetch quests and light puzzle solving, it does so in a fun way. There are almost no areas without combat, and even if you come across a body, it may spring up and attempt to kill you. Headshots, something that other games have taught the player are vital in combat, amount to only a part of the puzzle here. Dismemberment is the key in both strategy and execution. To kill the creatures, you must dismember their arms and legs, or at least part of them, and you can slow them down by taking the legs off to assess your next steps. While the environments are almost exclusively ship-based, you do venture out briefly into space, and it's a great touch that the color washes out and you only hear muffled sound. To deal with the enemies, you get a fun and varied assortment of weapons, starting with the above-mentioned plasma cutter. You can also collect the line gun, the ripper, the force gun, the contact gun, the flamer, and the pulse rifle. Notice only one of these is a traditional weapon, as even the flamethrower could be argued as a tool in this universe. It adds a nice little feel as Isaac's an engineer, so he would use engineering tools. All the weapons can be upgraded using power nodes in various workbenches. The upgrades are used in various areas like damage, capacity, and reloading, with an additional slot being dedicated to a secondary fire for all these. Part of the game's strategy comes in choosing what weapon to upgrade and how to tweak it. My personal favorite strategy is to make the plasma cutter a sort of BFG in this universe, and you can even get a cool trophy by only using the plasma cutter throughout the entire game. Doing a new game plus with a fully upgraded cutter is the easiest way. The other equipment you have is your suit and your stasis module. The stasis module is used to slow down time, which can be used on enemies or a tricky door. Both of these can be upgraded at the workbenches, but you can also buy suits by finding the schematics. One of the best gameplay tweaks is that there are no save rooms. This also means that there are no automatically safe rooms. Even rooms that have save consoles, workbenches, and stores don't guarantee safety. You have to clear the room out before you're free to use them. In addition to buying new suit schematics at the store, you can buy weapons, ammo, nodes, medkits, and a bunch of other stuff. You get the money for these, or credits, off of dead necromorphs, corpses of humans, and even crates you find scattered throughout the ship. Finally, these stores can be used as a storage container almost, similar to the crates found in Resident Evil safe rooms. But be careful, even if you clear out a room, you may come back later and find an even stronger type of enemy. Speaking of the enemy roster, it has a lot of similar creatures, but enough variations in types to keep combat encounters fresh. The standard slasher necromorph, which has various skins and color tones, the leaper, the lurker, pregnants, which spew out swarmers, guardians, which shoot out pods, the infector, and the exploder. The not as common creatures include the tentacle, the brute, which acts as a mid-boss at times, the divider, the twitcher, and the wheezer. There are also 4 boss characters, which are the hunter, the leviathan, the slug, and finally the hive mind. The gameplay loop is to go on fetch quests or fix something, build up your weapons and suit with nodes and credits, occasionally fight a boss, and repeat. While simple sounding, it's different enough and never gets dull.
Jesus! Overfire!
While there is a constant amount of action, there is just as much terror. The enemy designs themselves are disgusting and horrifying to think of what happened to the human bodies to get there. There is a liberal amount of jump scares, but they are fun and add tension when you see a vent or a body on the ground. The death animations can be anywhere from Mortal Kombat levels of over-the-top gore to a simple slice or a really disturbing transformation for Isaac's corpse. The environment and sound design are superstars here. As you go through the ship, you will find gory remains, but also quiet, disturbing mass suicide graves of the followers of Unitology. As mentioned, the sound in space is muffled, and you can be caught off guard by anything lurking that you don't see, but would normally hear. Even the promotional and opening videos with a great use of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star did a wonderful job to set up what you're getting into. Finally, the world building is exceptional. The few remaining alive NPCs help explain what happened and provide emotional depth, while the written, audio, and video logs do the legwork in explaining how the ship and the planet got from point A to point B. This is even more important as Isaac, at least in this first game, is mute. One of the best choices the developers made was to have a lack of a pause menu for the HUD. Your weapons show a tiny number which indicates ammo remaining, and your health is represented by the lights on your spine. As it depletes, you will go from green to yellow to red to blinking. Anytime you want to check your inventory, you do so at your own risk.
Get the hell out of there!
Even with the slow start, the game eventually sold well enough that the series was thriving for a brief time. There were 2 direct sequels with Dead Space 2 in 2011 and Dead Space 3 in 2013. 2 I think is the best overall game, but it isn't quite as scary as the first, and 3 would qualify for a black sheep status if we did that with horror video games. Dead Space Extraction would release on the Wii of all places in 2009, and be a fun on-rails experience taking place mostly on Aegis 7 during the outbreak. The original game would get a kinda janky iOS port, and a strange puzzle motion comic called Dead Space Ignition would bridge the gap between the first and second games, and would release in late 2010. In addition to the games, the universe was expanded with graphic novels, 2 full-fledged books, and even 2 animated horror films. So why was the last game in 2013? 3 would have lackluster sales and get pushed away by fans with its focus on action more than horror. Visceral Games would make Dante's Inferno in between Dead Space games. I really enjoy that one, but would then be shut down permanently by EA in 2017. Fans are left with 2 great horror titles and a slew of very playable, watchable, and readable content to go back to. The first 2 games are the ones that I love wholeheartedly and go back to from time to time, especially in October. After nearly a decade of dormancy, EA is finally ready to announce something. We are ready to play it. Make us whole again, EA. Make us whole. But I'd also like to see the original trilogy put on current-gen consoles so everyone can revisit or discover for the first time. What are your guys' favorite games in the series? Did you play any of the offshoots, read the books, watch the movies? What is the scariest part of this game or the franchise for you? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe to our JoBlo Horror Videos channel. Tell your friends who like this sort of content, and turn the bell on to receive notifications for all our latest videos. We're an independent company, and we appreciate all your support.